Well, first of all, thanks, Carl, for joining us. Appreciate you. Let me start off with kind of a three-parter. What experience did you have that led you to the point where you could write a book about leadership? What inspired you to write the book? And then we've had this conversation, but it would be interesting for other people to hear how the Forbes recommendation came about. So basically, experience, inspiration, and then the Forbes recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And again, thanks everybody for your time as well. I'm always mindful and excited about the fact the learning is always two-way. So it's never just a one-way experience. So yeah, I mean, almost 30 years with PricewaterhouseCoopers, very accustomed to what it's like to be market facing, to be technically proficient in what you do, et cetera. So I was a partner there for about 20 of the 30 years, which means you're a part owner of the Canadian firm, connected to a global network of PwC. And very early on, I wasn't even a partner for a year when the then CEO asked me if I would take on a role as the national coaching leader for all of the partners in the firm. And that afforded me an opportunity to actually hire a faculty of external professional coaches, so performance psychologists and psychiatrists. And then that role allowed me to be really nicely positioned to work with a lot of the Olympic athletes that we would sponsor for the winter and summer games. And then I got to know a number of their coaches. So the interesting thing for me was, on the one hand, I had this vantage point where I was understanding what was required of the business sector. On the other hand, I was noticing what these Olympic athletes were focusing on vis-a-vis what they called the neuroscience of behavior, and upskilling for what they called emotional intelligence, or really just being more intelligent about your emotions. And it didn't take long for me to realize that a lot of what the athletes were focused on was a bit of a mystery to the boardroom. So as I started to sort of cross-pollinate some of these concepts and ideas, it went viral with our people within the firm. And then ultimately the partners decided they wanted to learn more about this. And then eventually our clients started to suggest, why is it that when I meet with some of your teams, I just feel like the energy is so consistently high, the service orientation, the possibility orientation, et cetera. And I used to smile and say, that is more by design than by chance. So if you really do want to know how we were doing that, it's a fun conversation, happy to have it. And then that in and of itself started to open up all kinds of opportunities. So that was a lot of my background. And then I spent years in national and then global leadership roles, really honing and fine-tuning our understanding around how is it that we can create the kind of space that allows others to self-select, to actually offer the best version of themselves in service of something that matters. As for the inspiration, Greg, it's really interesting, So two things would happen. Whenever I would give a keynote to non-partners in the firm, meaning anybody who wasn't quite at that level of experience yet, the first question everyone would ask me is, please tell me the other partners are having to learn about this. So that was when we were giving talks internally. Whenever I was giving talks externally, the first question people would ask is, do you have a book? And when I would say, no, they would say, can you recommend some? And what I started to realize was, of course, I could recommend many, all kinds of fantastic thought leaders out there. But I was noticing a gap between taking a lot of this insight and infusing it through a business lens. Now, that doesn't mean the book was only oriented towards helping you if you're in business, but that was the gap that I was noticing. An awful lot of people, for example, with your company would go to a keynote, maybe your town hall, maybe your annual conference, your offsite, and it would be awesome. You'd hear from these incredible neuroscientists, et cetera. And then it was left to you to decide, how are we going to make this relevant for our business? And what I found was a lot of senior leaders were struggling with, are we actually going to do anything with what we just heard? And so very often we would tend to just continue to behave the way we always have. Not always, of course, but just generally speaking, that was often the case. And so the more I got involved in helping people take this information and make it sticky, make it tangible, and overtly put it into practice, the more the sort of the secondary request was always for a book. And then lo and behold, in 2020, when COVID hit, it was really an interesting time for me because my phone was ringing off the hook with dear friends that were now finding themselves in the role of CEO or board chairs, et cetera. And I was prohibited from helping them. I was precluded from being able to help them because PwC was their auditor. And so I had a heart-to-heart with my family and said, what if I retire a little early from the firm so that I can have complete independence and be unencumbered to help whoever needs me for however long they may need me. Fortunately for me, as Greg knows, I have this incredible family who all said, yeah, you got to do it. Now that might sound like, oh, that's so nice, but you know, in the midst of COVID, you're a senior equity partner, stable income, to say, yeah, just maybe I'm going to leave and just, you know, help people, you know, come what may. It was quite fascinating to see the level of support I received. Anyway, all to say, I then started to give some keynotes virtually. And the CEO of my publishing company ended up seeing it and said, you have got to write a book around this. I haven't heard it framed this way before. Could we please talk? And we'd love to represent you, etc. So that was a joy to behold. And then, interestingly enough, we published in February of this year. And then first week of May, I was on vacation with my family. So my kids are now young adults, 24 and 20. My son Scott, my daughter Haley, and Julie and I have been together for 34 years. And we're on vacation together and don't have my phone. At one point, my kids say, hey, Dad, each one of us take our phone. Let's figure out, research where you want to go to dinner tonight, and then we'll compare notes. I said, okay. So Julie was carrying my phone in her purse. She handed it to me. It wasn't even on. I turned it on. And my daughter noticed my face. She goes, Dad, is everything okay? I said, yeah, but something's going on because my phone is like, you know, all the bings and the hits and everything else. It was more than normal. And then I noticed a subject heading from my publisher that just said, OMG, you're in Forbes. And so I took a look at the message, and basically Forbes had gotten a hold of my book, completely unbeknownst to me, did their own research on it, and then decided to suggest that it was a must-read for 2024. I have to tell you that I absolutely loved that that was organic. In fact, earlier on, my kids had even asked me, so Dad, what are you going to do to market and publish and all that? And I said, you know what, guys, this might sound naive, but I created the book because you asked me to, because there was an opportunity that might help people. You create it, you let it go, and it'll be what it'll be. So then the fact that it took this life of its own and that Forbes came across it and then decided to do their own research, it really meant a lot to me. I thought that was a really lovely way of having the content appreciated in a way that just maybe it could now reach a few more people. And then the rest is history. Now I have the pleasure of getting to speak and help individuals and answer whatever questions that may arise. So thanks, Greg. Yeah, thanks for the query. And obviously, thanks for pulling this together. I always love spending time together with you, and it's a joy to spend time with anybody in your circle of influence. So great to be here.
All right. And your kids were excited about you writing the book as well.
Yeah, you know, my kids, it's funny. My son has now graduated university. My daughter's in third year. But they said more and more as they became younger adults, they were recognizing just how rare it was amongst their circle of friends that a lot of their friends weren't having the kind of family dinners that we regularly had, where everybody talks openly. They look to each other for suggestions. The learning is always both ways. And so they had suggested if you could sort of codify and capture some of these stories that have been so helpful for us, it would really mean a lot to some of our friends. And we'd love to be able to give them something like that. And I just thought, what a wonderful way to request putting some time and effort into writing a book, not for how many copies it'll sell, not for any of those external factors, but rather just because they had a lot of close friends that could really be helped with this. And sometimes they struggle to either recall the stories or, you know, they just don't have the same life experience to be able to frame it accordingly. Basically, Greg, that's all I needed to hear to give me that final push to really take some time to make it happen. And by the way, may I just say thank you to anybody who has purchased this book or given any of your own precious time to take a look at it and see how it might be helpful both for you and anybody that you care about.
All right. So how we want to do this? If anybody have a question?
No doubt everybody has a thought or two, so feel free. I mean, this is a small enough group. It's wonderful. We can literally chat about anything you like.
Well, I'll jump in here. First of all, thank you for investing the time, energy, and effort to hop on here. I must say, meeting Greg and being on the call with you about a year ago and then hearing about the book, it's one that I'm going to reread over and over. And it's one that I've gifted to other leaders just because you're focused on how we're wired and what we can do to change on the inside instead of always looking externally. But this is in reference to the book. And for those that are on here that have not read the book, I would highly encourage you to go out after this and purchase it because it is hands down one of the best reads that I've read. So in one of the chapters, you talked about the four mindsets, right? The spectator, the leader, the cynic, and the victim. Do you mind elaborating for those that are on the call, like how we use these in how we communicate with others?
Yeah, one of the Olympic teams that I had the pleasure of spending some time with, they love this tool too because they decided to use it from the point of view of it's the leader in each of us that we really want to spend time with, less so the spectator, the victim, or the cynic. And if you don't over time practice being mindful of staying in the leadership quadrant, you're not going to take the field. So just be mindful of that. We're not interested in having players on an Olympic team that just want to spectate. We certainly don't want to just hear the cynicism. And if you neither want to be here nor you're willing to invest any energy vis-a-vis the victim mindset, then you're not going to last either. And what I noticed very quickly was in the business context, it was very helpful too. So this tool is just a fun little two-dimensional. So if you had a y-axis and an x-axis, on the y-axis, imagine you had attitude. And on the x-axis, you had energy. And then you just draw your typical four quadrants. So imagine you've got a fantastic attitude. You're thrilled to be here right now, really interested. This is a cool opportunity to share with any number of interesting individuals. But your energy is such that it wanes. Sometimes you're present, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're involved, sometimes you check out. That's the spectator in us. And this is just about our mindset, how we're setting our mind at any given point in time. This is not labeling us as individuals. This is just that our brain can pop into these mindsets at any given point in time. In fact, in the very same meeting, you can find yourself in different quadrants, depending upon the subject and what else is going on, etc. So that would be the spectator in us. If on the other hand, you're like, oh no, Carl, I'm here, I'm dialed in. You're going to have all of my energy, but you have to understand, my friend, I'm a little conditioned to my way or the highway. So my attitude is going to be, let's just say, less than supportive, constructive, positive, hopeful, optimistic. And it's going to be a little bit more on the whatever I think is right is where I tend to go. That's the cynic in us. And of course, it can be alive and well at any given point in time. The victim in us is, you know what? I don't want to be here, but somehow I feel forced to be here, and I am certainly not going to contribute. That's the victim in us. Well, of course, the leader in us is conscious of two things, both the attitude that I'm bringing to the table and the degree of presence, my energy. By the way, there's a fun little tip that I talk about in the book that I just thought of, so I'll throw it out there. Practice, and I often talk about practice because practice is the bridge between theory and mastery. Practice, always have in your mind, follow your body. What the heck does that mean? Wherever you are physically, practice being there mentally. Do you think we're good at that? I will tell you, most of us are quite terrible. We're almost never where we are. We're thinking about what came 5 minutes earlier or what's going to come 5 minutes hence. And yet, if I were to ask you, if any one of you checks out on me during this conversation, assuming I can see you, and assume yours is the face that I can see right now, do you think I could pick up on that? Yeah, you bet. And by the way, if you're talking to a client, they can also pick up if you check out on them or a colleague, etc. You were here anyway. Why wouldn't you practice staying present with me? Or as my mom used to say when I was a little guy, Carly, if you practice living in the present, you will always live with presence. She was way ahead of her time on the energy spectrum side of things. Another little short story, Shayla, and then I'll come back to the diagram just because sometimes these stories can really highlight these things. I'll ask one of you just for fun as a proxy for the rest of the group. I'll ask you a question that my dad asked me when I was a little guy. So Wes, maybe I'll ask you if you don't mind. Who would you say is the most important person in your life?
I don't have one person. I have 4 children. There's not one that's above that. Other than my personal development and getting better every day, I don't have any one person that would stick out and say, this is the one person that's most important to me.
I love that. Thanks, Wes. And thanks for allowing me to call on you. So when my dad asked me that question when I was a little guy, I said, well, Dad, you'd be up there. And then I said, and of course, Mom and my siblings and everything else. And he said, hey, Carl, just for fun, what if I suggested practicing always making it whoever happens to be in front of you at any given moment in time? Because you see, son, it's a bit of a trick question. In that moment, they're the only person in your life, so you may as well practice making them the most important one. Now, you don't have to subscribe to that, but I will tell you, if you decide just for kicks to put that into practice, and the next time anybody shares your company, you decide to stay fully present with them and for them, again, you don't have to believe a word I say today. Be a student of your own experience, experiment with it, and just watch what happens. So when you look at this two-dimensional tool and we're talking about presence and energy, this is what that tool was really referring to. Are you still with me? Yes or no? You either are or you're not. And if you're conscious of staying present in any given meeting, that's what we meant in the two-dimensional tool. So if you've got a fantastic attitude and you're fully present, that's the leader in you. And the leader in you is who I'm talking to right now. And you're also getting the leader in me. How funny would it be in the midst of this conversation if I checked out on you? I could only imagine how entertaining that could be for you. So that tool ended up being very helpful for people because it was just a reminder at any given point in time, oh, I think I'm spectating right now, so I need to just make sure I stay present. Or I've got the energy, but I'm starting to become a little cynical, or whatever the case may be. Now, very briefly, Shayla, a reminder, how do you navigate from one of these quadrants to the leadership quadrant if you find yourself behaving more as a spectator? Well, to migrate from spectatorship to leadership, just remember your candor and a little bit of courage. What do I mean by candor? You're literally a one-of-a-kind original, never to be again. You're a unique amalgam of life experience, never to be replicated, never to be duplicated. You either get that or you don't. And when you remind yourself of that, and in the midst of a conversation, there's something that crosses your mind's eye, you're curious about, etc., just have the courage to share it. If you don't, the trajectory of where that conversation could have otherwise gone will forever be gone. And so just remembering that candor and the opportunity to be of service and to share something, because the authentic version of you has something you'd like to share, you immediately migrate from a spectator to the leader in you. If, on the other hand, you find yourself being a little bit more cynical at any given moment in time, the easiest way to shift is to just practice being curious. After all, if I asked you, who among you know the answer to every question ever asked? Exactly, nobody. Never have, never will. But I will tell you, I've been around a lot of thought leaders who put a lot of pressure on themselves to pretend like they always have the answer. Nobody does. So free yourself of that, stay curious, and you'll migrate from cynicism to leadership. And as for how do you migrate when you're feeling a little more like a victim, attitude is suboptimal and my energy is waning, just realize you can't be a victim in this context unless you're focused on yourself. So the easiest way to migrate from a victimization mindset to a leader is, how may I be of service? Get out of your own way. Focus on, in this given moment, what is it I know or who do I know that I can actually leverage in service of the moment to make it just a little better than it would have been had I not done anything at all. And what you'll find, interestingly enough, is that service orientation allows you to shift from a victim mindset to a leader mindset. The reason why I talk about this in the book is a couple reasons. First of all, I know some boards that I've socialized this tool with they never have to talk about it again. I'll tell you what they do. They have an image of it on the wall in the boardroom. And the second any of these board members walk into the room, they just see the image and they immediately are reminded, oh, right, because they knew they were walking in cynical or I don't have time for this, and so it immediately gave them an opportunity to self-regulate and to check themselves on whether or not it really was the leader in them. And remember, what we mean by that is just, are you mindful in this moment of both your attitude and your energy? That's all we meant by it. The reason why I elaborated a little more in the book, though, is because it's only the leader in you of those 4 mindsets. If you don't consciously set your mind, someone else will set it for you. So just know that. Also know that your mindset is what determines your mind sight. In other words, as the ancient Stoics would say, how you see the issue is the issue. Shayla and I both went and saw the same movie last night. She said, what a celebration. I said, what a tragedy. How is that possible? We literally just saw the exact same thing. Because the lens you practice looking at the world through is the exact same lens that translates the data coming back. So let me ask you a simple question. Do you think the leader in you is going to choose different words and actions than would the cynic or the spectator or the victim? No question. And again, you don't have to believe me. You can just be mindful of what words did I just choose in this context. And if you were in any of those mindsets other than the more optimal one, you'll find that those may be some of the things you're apologizing for later. But the other thing I like to point out is it's only the leadership mindset that will consciously practice being intentional about how you focus your attention. The spectator won't because you're in and out. The cynic won't because it's a flamethrower attitude, my way or the highway. So you're going to lose out on an awful lot of the magic that was otherwise in the room. And the victim won't because you're not even going to be present for most of what actually happens. You're going to be so consumed with just yourself that whatever is going on around you is going to be completely lost. Blank screen in the mind's eye. So is that helpful, Shayla? That's a little bit more about that tool. And many people have found it helpful just to remind ourselves, am I conscious of how I'm setting my mind at this very given moment in time? And if not, it's a fun little tool to perhaps play with.
It's definitely something I want to draw and put into our development room, because you're right, it sets the tone and gets people to be mindful of where they are in that. So thank you.
You're welcome. And by the way, if anybody reads the book and decides to use the tool with your team, it can be a lot of fun to ask your team, hey, everybody, take a few minutes. We can all relate to every quadrant. Talk a little bit about the last time you found yourself in any one of those other minds, in any of the mindsets, and what did it look like, sound like, feel like? It can just be a really interesting conversation, not only to level set that we're, common humanity. We all get it. We've all been there. But it actually helps operationalize empathy. It helps you hear from some people about some of the times they found themselves there. And then obviously socializing, how is it we can support each other if we are in one of those suboptimal settings? What is it we can do to help each other accordingly? That can be a very nice conversation to have as well. What else? What else would you like to chat about?
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So really kind of going along with the quadrants that you talked about, maybe think of something. So with your background and experience and probably interviewing, bringing people into an organization or partnering with or anything of that sort, is that model or quadrant and that graph, is that something you go over in like an interview or in like a presentation with a potential partner?
Yeah, so yes, when I was with PwC, what we ended up doing was sometimes, people would ask about, so what is it like around here? Can you tell us a little more about how you do things, you say by design as a little more by chance? And so that may be any number of tools that we would socialize with people and say, leadership is about influence, but ultimately, if you want to influence others towards a meaningful goal or whatever the case may be, that influence really starts with how effectively you influence yourself. In other words, if you ask something of me that you yourself are not modeling, the odds are I won't believe you. And there are consequences when you don't believe somebody. And so very often we would socialize it in that context just to see what they might want to say about it. And without even elaborating like I just did, even just to see, are they curious? Are they willing to acknowledge times when they found themselves in some of those other areas? How excited are they about the prospect of developing the leader in them? Do they want to probe a little more about how do you even do that? Like, isn't that interesting that if I want to help others more effectively, I have to first make sure that things are healthy on the home front, so to speak? Like, how do I do that? Or do they just say, oh, yeah, okay. Anyway, I have a few other questions for you. Those kinds of things. So sometimes it's just interesting to get a feel for how curious are people naturally going to be. And the ones who really are, who kind of get lit up at that and then want to understand how is it that I can make sure I'm doing my part. It's a wonderful tool to have a conversation around where that's concerned.
Okay, very neat, very neat. Because yeah,
So,
that's
so it wasn't, you know how sometimes people will use like case scenarios or whatever. So we would use it in any number of different ways, but very often it was just as a bit of a social tool to kind of loosen up the conversation, but to also see where people would want to take it, right?
okay.
And by the way, the Olympic teams, once they knew how that tool worked, so instead of leader in the top right, they wrote leader/player. In other words, if you were going to take the field or take the ice as a soccer team or a hockey team, etc., you had to be mindful of your attitude and energy.
Mhm.
And don't worry, we're not perfect. You know, we're going to make mistakes, but if you don't show the kind of effort to more often than not want to migrate from spectator, victim, or cynic to leader, you're just not going to be a part of this team in the long term. Which is another way using corporate speak of ownership, accountability. I mean, let's be honest, Vinny. Who are you really accountable to in life? The short answer, only ever yourself. Because who do you control at the end of the day? Only yourself. But the funny thing is, when you work with and or for awesome inspirational leaders, you actually feel accountable to them.
Mhm.
But the truth is, you're really only ever accountable to yourself. And I don't say that, you know, to be a downer or anything. I say that to feel empowering. It's like, do you do what you say or not? Can I rely on you or not? Can I take you at your word or not? So these are all the kinds of extended conversations you can have that revolve around that tool. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful, very helpful. We're looking to bring on more talent onto our team right now. You know, I've told my team manager that, you know, we want to attract leadership. We want to attract not only good sales skills and admin skills or this or that, but good leadership skills, or at least a drive or want for that. So I love that, being able to add that into our conversation.
Oh, and can I just add one more thing for everybody's benefit? Well, I'll ask you a question instead. It's more fun. So most companies, in fact, all organizations will espouse values. They'll say we have a mission. That's their why. We have values, which represent the behavioral expectations of the brand. That's the how. And then they have a vision, usually. Great visions create visuals. In other words, if we make decisions consciously that align with the mission, because why would we do otherwise? And we behave in a way that consciously aligns with the values, we will march in the direction of our vision. So that's generally speaking how that works. So with that as context, let me ask you, when an organization espouses its organizational values, which represent the behavioral expectations of the brand, are living those values optional?
No, and that could, yeah,
Right. So I've
Yeah.
never met an executive yet anywhere in the world where when I've asked that question, they're like, oh yeah, they're totally optional. In our place, you can behave however you want. Okay. And yet, even though everyone tells me, of course they're not optional, Carl, it's a silly question. I always smile and say, no, I didn't think you were going to suggest that they were optional. Hey, do me a favor. Can someone in the room just remind me what they are? And what I will tell you is I've met very few executives who can actually tell me what the values of their organization are. And even if they can, I've met fewer still who have told me that they've socialized what those values look like in action when we, the collective that work together, are at our best. So I say that to you, Vinny, because if you really want to help your recruiting, make sure you've done your own internal homework around, first of all, what are our values?
Mhm.
What do they actually look like in action when all of us are at our best? And it's looking for recruits and new hires that are curious, interested, and committed to consciously aligning their own with those of your organization. Now, there's a data point here that's interesting. There's only about 5% of individuals who have ever even self-reflected to know what their top 1, 2, or 3 are. And so, there's lots of room here for growth, but that alignment's going to be very, very important to making sure that you're attracting the kind of people that can deliver on what the brand promise is suggesting to the marketplace with less effort.
That's great.
So I digress a little, but just because I so often don't see anybody spend time in that space, and it's kind of fascinating. Just like, often senior executives will come to me and say, Carl, I'm thinking of pitching this buy, sell idea or hire, no, whatever it is, restructuring to the board. Where do you think I should start? I said, well, how does it reconcile with your mission? I'm sorry, I don't understand. What's your mission statement? Why does this organization exist? Like, do you mean like literally like our mission statement? Yeah. Like, what's your why? Why do you exist? Oh, well, to be honest, I haven't looked in a while. Okay. My first suggestion, look at what it says and make sure whatever you're recommending aligns with it, furthers that mission. Why would you make a business decision that isn't consciously aligned with it? So these sound simple, but in practice, I often see them overlooked. So maybe that's helpful.
I'm going to jump in on the present part. When you talked about being present all the time and in that quadrant, and just the initial thought to put yourself in that obviously is going to be beneficial for me. But how do I control this? That's in my head. That's the deadline is this, and I'm trying to give attention to someone who's in my office, and I'm trying to focus on it, but I still have 3 other things that need to be done, and I got 15 minutes to do those. Like, what real techniques can I use? Then, I'm thinking about it's going to help, but I need some practical stuff.
Yeah, no, Wes, it's such a thank you for that. It's an awesome question. There's lots we could say about it, but I'll start with this. You hear a lot these days about leaders need to be more vulnerable and courageous. Okay? What I will suggest is it's really just about being honest. If you're actually honest both with yourself and others, and you make more of a practice of that, others will bestow labels like, wow, you're so vulnerable, you're so courageous. The truth is you were just being honest. Part of why I'm giving you that as context is when I'm even coaching and or working alongside somebody and we're doing, say, the planning on a project, I will actually take that time before any emotion is introduced, before anything has been off the rails, before any expectations arise that we couldn't have anticipated. And I'll say, hey, listen, on this journey we're on together, if the pressure gets turned up or we find ourselves kind of limited on time, how do you like to manage that? How do you want our interpersonal dynamic to operate? What do you mean, Carl? Well, we all say we have an open door policy, and I do have an open door policy. But if I've got something really pressing, like I've really got to get it done for a deadline, how do I make sure I convey that to you so that nobody's offended, nobody misunderstands? Like, help me with that. And very often people would be like, well, in your case, Carl, just close your door and we'll make sure nobody interrupts you or whatever. So my point is there are ways to kind of prep for that. The other thing I will tell you that goes a long way is if you socialize with team members, hey, listen, everybody, I'm glad everybody understands their role in this. I'm excited about teaming with everybody. If things do get derailed or there's a misalignment, misunderstanding, or miscommunication, how do you want us to deal with this? Oh, no, I'm sure it won't happen. Well, I'm sure it won't happen either. But if it did, how would you like us to deal with it? Are you you got to come see me right way in person kind of person? Are you you're going to send me a text and let me sleep on it kind of person? Are you we have to at least have a phone call? Like, let's actually socialize this protocol so that when things happen, which they do, nobody's going to be surprised at these kinds of things. But the other thing I will ask you, Wes, is this. Do most of the people in your world think that you're busy?
I don't know what most is, but yeah, I would say a majority at the moment think I'm pretty busy.
You bet. And anytime you have any level of seniority, if you ask anybody, they know how busy you are, which is why if you do decide to carve out that 5 minutes, that's the stuff they might be talking about at dinner tonight. So what I'm saying is, by the way, anybody want to guess what the number one most common response to how are you is in the workplace? Anybody want to guess? So you're walking down the hall, you see each other, and someone says, hey, how are you, Wes? Or how are you, Brian, Vinny? What do you think the number one response is?
It's either I'm fine or I'm busy.
It's busy. I'm busy. And usually, just as an aside, I like to joke and I say, oh, shoot, you know what? I asked the wrong question. And people will say, what? What do you mean? I'll say, no, I didn't mean how are you? I already know how you are. You're an original one of a kind. You're awesome. What I really meant was how are things? And I guess you've already answered that for me. And people would sometimes stop me and say, why did you do that? And I'll say, because when I ask someone, how are they? And they respond with busy, that immediately tells me they're confusing who they are with their circumstance. And if you think you're your circumstance, you can very quickly become a victim of that circumstance. But if you understand that who you are is independent of that, now that's different. And that's more about this energy awareness and management, etc. So what I'm suggesting, Wes, is if it really is urgent, I would have no problem or qualms about saying to my team member, I love you. I just literally I have to get this out the door. I know you'll understand. How does your afternoon look, or how does tomorrow morning look? But I'm going to have to reschedule. On the other hand, if someone drops in and I decide in that moment they actually are going to get my attention, I actually do things physically to evidence it. I will take my phone if it's present and I'll literally throw it in the drawer. If I have a laptop, I will close it. If I have a monitor, I will turn it away. I'll take a physical moment to just sit there and literally be present for them, because that's the cue for them that I'm there with them and for them. Make no mistake. And the other really neat thing is, remember that you train people how to treat you. Never forget that. So you can only imagine if I've made a habit out of some of the things that I've just said to you, prepping, anticipating, being honest. If I'm going to make the time for you, you're going to know I'm making the time for you. People all of a sudden start to appreciate your time. And they don't just stop in if it's casual, unless they know it's a casual afternoon or whatever. And they'll check first. Knock, knock. Is this a good time? And very often when someone will say that, I never lose the opportunity to do this, everybody. Always practice positively reinforcing for the behavior you want to see more of. So when someone knocks on my door and says, is this a good time? Before I even answer, I just say, first of all, I just want to thank you for even asking. That is awesome. And actually, it just so happens it's not. Now, just notice, when I approach it that way, they're totally fine, because I just finished sincerely thanking them. But I'll tell you the other thing I've just done. There's no chance that person's going to come by my door tomorrow or the next day and not knock first. You literally train people how to treat you. So these are all just little tips and tactics that you can put into play. And by the way, by being honest about it, it actually affords them the opportunity to do in kind. So you've just given the person junior to you or less experienced than you the opportunity and the permission to do the exact same thing with you. And my hope is you'll be equally as responsive. If they say to you, well, remember, Wes, you asked me to get this done by 5 and it's like 4:30. And then the Wes's of the world go like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Thank you for reminding me. That's amazing. Carry on. Thanks for doing that. That's how that can operate. You only have to do it a few times and people start to really nicely self-regulate. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. Time flies when you're having fun, at least for me.
Anybody else got
Oh,
one? I've got a couple if you don't. So it seems like a lot of my, I don't know, Carl, hundreds of, at least 100, conversations over the last few years, a couple of
hey, Greg,
common.
before you jump in, I do have a quick little fun thought. Just because of the context of when we ask a question and there's a pause, it can be really fun to practice learning to be very comfortable with silence. Because remember, when you ask a question, while you may conclude the silence is awkward, it actually isn't awkward at all for the other person. They're thinking. And that may have been an example of that. You may have found yourself thinking of any number of things that you may decide to ask. So it actually wasn't awkward at all. But for Greg, and I'm not saying you, Greg, you're just the proxy for this, as someone who's facilitating, sometimes it can be like, okay, I want to make sure this moves along, right? And so a couple little fun thoughts, 2 ears, 1 mouth, practice using them in the same proportion. Or did you know that when your client does 80% of the talking, 100% of the time they'll conclude it was a great meeting? Or did you know that questions are the antidote to arrogance? Why? Because if I sincerely ask you for your thoughts, what do you think that telegraphs about what I think about you? 2 things. A, I respect you, and B, I must care about you. So practicing these things can be very, very, very powerful, regardless of the skill level of the individual that you have the pleasure to spend some time with. Anyway, sorry, Greg. I just digress a little because sometimes that can be a fun thing to be mindful of. Silence is just fine, particularly if you're talking to a loved one or a friend or anybody, actually. Just allow them some space to think. But with that said, Greg, I know we're limited on time, so carry on, my friend.
Let's try this one more time. Does anybody else have a question?
I will ask one more that was on my mind. First of all, I did read the book. I love it. I definitely want to read it again. And I just kind of started a journey of reading in the past year. I hadn't really been a reader, I'd say, ever, but I've definitely enjoyed it. So one question after reading this is, are there plans for future niche parts of biology of leadership, other types of books that you can even speak on?
Thanks, Vinny. So thank you for that. I'll answer that by saying a couple of quick thoughts. First of all, there's also an audio version, so you can get it anywhere. Spotify, if you're a Spotify premium member, you get it as part of your membership. iTunes, Audible, whatever your favorite source is. I only say that because some people really are more auditory in terms of their learning style. Others love both. They love to listen to it because they get something away from it. But then to read it, they can delve into some of the detail. So I just throw that out there for your benefit. And I partly say that too, Vinny, because I think there's a long runway for this book. I'm really, really excited that I was able to partner with some wonderful people to get it out there because there's just such a need for this conversation. And I don't see it going away anytime soon. Some of the science will evolve, and that's all well and good, but I think it's going to be around for a while. I will say, though, thank you for asking. I had a really cool call the other day with the CEO of the publishing company who said, Carl, we've been getting all these comments about your book. So yes, all this nice feedback, which is great, but the number one request for your sequel, if you will, is a parenting book. And the reason they were saying that is because they said the readers were saying 2 things. First of all, it's a discredit to the book for people to think it's only for business. And secondly, these leaders said it's helping me at least as much at home as it does in the office. And by the way, when I say at home, these people were suggesting with my children or this, that, or the other. So do I have anything in the plans for that? No. I think my kids are phenomenal individuals, but I just think that's such an interesting piece of feedback. And what I loved about it was it just speaks to the heart of how this really it's not limited to just business, but it also speaks to the fact that it's the same person who goes everywhere. So your presence, your energy awareness, your mindfulness, it's everywhere. And so people will often, as an extension of that, say, are you this person with your family and stuff? You bet. If my kids were listening right now, they go, yep, that's our dad. And my suggestion for those who may choose otherwise, this is just highly efficient. And I actually don't have to remember anything that I've said in the past. I just literally show up and from one experience to the next, contribute the best I can to try to be helpful. Let it go, come what may. So no sequel right now, but appreciate the ask and really appreciate you digging in. Feel free, by the way, anybody who does read it or enjoy it, if you have any other questions, you want to shoot me a note on LinkedIn or whatever, I mean, by all means, feel free to do that.
Well, and it makes you wonder how many people don't see themselves as leaders or look at this book and think you have to be a leader. But in all actuality, you're leaders of your home, you're leaders of your friends, I mean, like we are that in itself. It's not just business. It's not just a CEO. It's not, so for them to recommend a parenting book, it's like you literally could read this and still get the same concept as a parent too. So
yeah, thank you, Shayla. And in fact, that's why this resonates just as much. I go and speak, many of my friends are teachers, and it resonates as much at junior high as it does in high school, as it does in university or graduate programs, let alone, with very experienced executives around the board table. It's funny too. I was speaking with a group of university students the other day, and I said, they wanted to talk a little bit about diversity and the strength that can derive from diverse teams. And I asked them an open-ended question, and I said, hey, everybody, look around at this room. Does it look diverse to you? And everybody looked around and they were like, yeah, it looks like a really diverse room. And I said, yeah, cool. And visible representation can matter, et cetera. And we all understand that. I said, but there is something I want to point out. You're right. It does look like a diverse room. In other words, lots of different people, lots of different individuals from presumably different backgrounds, which can be very enriching in terms of context and perspective and insight, et cetera. But just know this. If most of you have either been trained or conditioned to only say or share what you think the talking head at the front of the room wants to hear, we lose all diversity. And that was a big wake-up call for these folks, because they started to realize they do it all the time. You have no idea how many executive meetings I'm in where someone will say, any questions, comments, curiosities? Nope, nothing. That's impossible. So really what you're showing is there's just no one willing to talk about it. It's just not possible that you don't have a thought. The question is, again, are you going to give yourself permission, to your point, Shayla, to contribute? And moreover, how mindful are we of the quality of the experience that we co-create with others? One of the things I talk about in the book, there's one variable, one attribute more than any other that will determine whether or not people want to engage with you again. Whether you're a salesperson, it doesn't even matter your role. That one attribute, the quality of the experience you just co-created with me. And I can prove it. Some people think it's your technical proficiency and stuff. In this day and age, that's table stakes, because show me somebody with technical acumen, that's great, but I can get that somewhere else if I have to. I mean, in the extreme, maybe you have a proprietary idea that lasts what these days? A day, a week, before someone picks up on it and they can replicate it. So then why am I choosing you? Why do I keep coming back to you? There are other people who have your skills, but I keep coming back to you. Why? And the simple answer is, I really enjoy the experience that you co-create with me. So if you're not conscious of the experience you're co-creating with others, that's a massive opportunity. And right back to your point again, Shayla, whether you're earlier on in your life, later on in your life, it doesn't matter. How conscious are you of that? If you left this room right now and I asked everybody else online, give me the top 3 words that describe that individuals that you all know, would those 3 words align with who you know yourself to be at your best? If the answer is yes, amazing, carry on. If the answer is no, equally amazing, because there's an opportunity to close that gap. but you have to first be honest about it. Anything else, Greg? Any other?
You have a hard stop at the top of the.
I won't say, I mean, no, it's never hard, but I'm happy if there's any other comments or questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, there is someone else waiting, but it's not, there's some flex.
You tell me if you've got time for this story, if we could, because it was an impactful for me. And again, kind of ties in with Vinny. It's why I'm so enthusiastic about your book is it's not just a business book, it's a relationship book. And so, again, we talk a lot about awareness and energy and being aware of how the way you show up impacts the people that you're with. And I know you open your keynotes often with something along those lines, asking people if they're aware of their energy and their impact when they come in. So I don't know if if you have a short answer to that. And then also kind of along the same lines was and you can pick which direction you go. You had told a story to me early on about breakfast with Haley.
Oh, yeah, sure.
When the orange
Well, so that was in the context of my daughter. That was in the context of, I had the pleasure of doing some work with Stephen Covey and the Covey Institute years ago, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then he wrote another one called The 8th Habit, etc. And one of the other concepts that they came up with was something called the 90-10 principle. And the idea was that, 10% of your life experience derives from life happens. And the other 90% of your life experience is a function of how you respond to that 10%. So what Greg was talking about was some people where we were in a group setting and someone said, can you give me an example of what that means? I go, yeah, I can recall vividly a time when my daughter was younger and I was scrambling to get ready to go to work. And she was just, this 8-year-old sitting at the breakfast table. And I went over and I said hello to her and good morning and gave her a kiss on the head. And I sat down next to her and I was kind of scrambling and getting ready to go. And she accidentally spilled orange juice on me. So life happens. That's the 10%. Unfortunately, I didn't handle it very well at that time. I had some evolving to do. So I was pretty scattered about the fact that I was going to be late. I was imagining what that was going to mean. So I just didn't evidence the kind of patience that I normally would. She was mortified that she did it. She was apologetic. I didn't have time for her. I was short. I was curt. I went. I don't know if I'm going to have time to change my shirt. I just don't have time right now, Haley. But Daddy, I'm sorry. I don't have time right now. I go. I change the shirt. I got to go. Can I at least have a hug? I got to go. So fast forward, I end up at this meeting. Now I ask you, how easy was it for me to be present in the meeting that I went to when all I remembered when I left that exchange were these big crocodile tears from these big, beautiful brown eyes from this remarkable young lady, right? Incredibly difficult, if not impossible. That's the 90% as it continues to unfold. But then I also ask you, what do you think the rest of her morning was like? How do you think she felt? So the 10% was the orange juice happens. The 90% of the experience is what happens afterwards. To which somebody in the group said, I must say, Carl, I mean, I know we're all human, but that does surprise me. And I had a big smile on my face and I said, yeah, I mean, I took some creative liberties with the story. That's actually not how it happened. I mean, the orange juice did spill, but I smiled and I told her, sweetheart, accidents happen. Fortunately for us, I've got some time. It'll take me 2 seconds to change my shirt. I gave her a big hug. She was happy. I was happy. We went off. We had a great day. But when Greg said, why did you share the story the way you did the first time? I said, because we can all relate to times when maybe it was the other way around. And those are the things we're apologizing for later. And I just wanted it to stick. We've all been in those instances where that 10% of life happens. When I handled it really, really well and effectively, okay, that's beautiful. Carry on. But what about the times when it maybe wasn't as optimal? Well, those are the times when it takes a lot for us to step back and say, you know what? Well, here's how I'll end it, Greg. The most effective and inspirational leaders in the world, including all of us, make one habit a reality, without question. When they do experience miscommunication, misalignment, or misunderstanding, the first thing they do is they stop, step back, and ask themselves, how did I just contribute to this? Now, I know we all nod when we hear that. I will also tell you it's very rare. It's much easier to point out why someone else is the cause of my woes. But if you can just make a practice out of asking, how did I just contribute to that? Was it my tone? Was it my word selection? Was it my body language? Did I not understand the context? Meaning, did I not understand them? That can do wonders. And since we're talking about influence here, you know, the greatest ability to influence somebody else is to create the kind of space that actually supercharges them to want to contribute. Because as the science proves, you don't actually motivate others, but you can dramatically influence the space within which they choose to motivate themselves or not. So the litmus test for all of us is, what kind of space do you create for the people around you? And we all have a track record of what it's like to be in our presence. And maybe I'll end on this note. The etymology of the word identity, I love this, is consistency of beingness. In other words, it's like something to be around you more often than not. Are you aware of what that is? And are you the tide that raises all boats? Or are you the one that people were kind of secretly hoping may have been on vacation when we had the next group meeting? And either way, I think it's just important to be honest about it. But I will also say this, please be as kind to yourself as you would ever hope to be towards someone else. So if you do have a track record that's less optimal, isn't it awesome that you're even here? Isn't it awesome that you want to be honest about that? And isn't it amazing that from literally this very next decision forward, you can consciously do something about that if you choose. And then the life around you will show you the impact of that. And I assure you, it'll be quite magical and self-perpetuating. So what a pleasure for me. I mean, listen, I am always happy to chat about anything that I think might be helpful. I'm humbled by your desire to want to make time to just even be here. Use the book as you will. I hope it serves you well. And allow this to be the first of any number of conversations if I can help you. And Greg, of course, I mean, listen, always love our chats, our friendship, and I'll give the last word to you.
All right, well, could go on for another 3 or 4 hours, so we'll wrap it up, and appreciate you being willing to share your time, and appreciate everybody that carved out the time to show up. I know we all got busy lives and things to do, but hopefully you found it valuable, and maybe we'll get Carl to come back and do another one.